Hi, everybody. It's Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute. Really pleased to be welcoming us here to such an important conversation about the Black influence in and on urban planning. I happen to be in Toronto today, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And we're covered by treaties here, the Williams Treaty and Treaty 13. I would say that this conversation is a profound one because urbanism has been an instrument of exclusion in pre-colonial times, and that has affected Indigenous communities and First Nations and Métis, obviously, but it's also affected communities of color, and particularly Black communities and Black people. So this conversation, we're just at the end of Black History Month, but I know a lot of us feel that every month needs to be Black History Month, and we need to continue to have a conversation about the roots of this and how we engaged in city building need to come to terms with not only the legacy of exclusion, but also how do we actually move forward in allyship and in making equity the priority and dismantling the structures that have continued to divide and remove people from communities and prevent them from having access to actually truly just equitable communities that are made by everyone for everyone. So what better topic than this for today? And also as we look around the world and see in front of us in every day on the television example, an extraordinary example in Europe and in other parts of the world too, where again, differences are being expressed in hostile, violent ways, and having to do with land and having to do with identity and having to do with race. So I appreciate the profoundness of this conversation, but I also want to say that we just have a remarkable group of folks that have come on the call and who are engaged in really positive, honest, frank discussions with their communities about how to do things differently and do things better. So I just want to thank Annika and Jamila and Stephanie and Cynthia for joining us, and also to just pass to my colleague from 880 Cities, Lanrick Bennett, who is going to be the chief ringleader here to have a really interesting conversation. The only last thing I'm going to say is that the producer of CityTalk for the last year and a half has been the remarkable Jamie Bastian, and today is her last day at CUI as she moves on to another great adventure with the Downey Wenjack Foundation. And I just want to say at the outset, while I have the mic, how appreciative all of us all, CityTalk people like me who've been on it, and all of you, and all the people listening, for Jamie's professionalism and her leadership. So Jamie, this is your last one. Thanks so much. Everybody loves you, and we wish you all the best as you move on to that next adventure for you. Lanrick, over to you. I look forward to listening to what I know will be a really fabulous conversation. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Mary, thank you so much. Welcome everyone. We're coast to coast for our guests and also for many of you watching. My name is Lanrick Bennett Jr. I am the managing director for a non-for-profit called 880 Cities, where we take a lens of our cities, our streets, our public spaces through the eyes of an 8-year-old up to an 80-year-old and everything in between. We see the world, if it can work for an 8-year-old, an 80-year-old, it's a great place for all of us to be able to explore and live and play in. So this, it's not even morning, it's afternoon now. In Toronto, I am joined by some amazing women on the panel this afternoon, sorry everyone. We're talking about Black influence in urban planning. I don't want to throw bios out to all of you. I really want to get into who these women are. And Stephanie, I think I'm just going to start with you just to let us know, just tell us a bit about who you are, and I'll let you pass it on afterwards to another one of our panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really a pleasure to be in conversation today with everyone. I'm Stephanie Allen. I am a founding board member of the Hogan's Alley Society here on the unceded and ancestral and unsurrendered lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Really want to recognize and recommit my efforts to working in good relations with Indigenous peoples, who are also suffering under many of the things we're going to talk about today. And yeah, my work is really I'm a real estate developer, not a planner, but somehow I've been forced into this world with all of you, and really happy to be talking with you today. My background is in affordable housing primarily, and also focusing on redressing the displacement of a Black community in Vancouver.
And why don't we pass it on to Cynthia?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever you may be across Canada. As noted, my name is Cynthia Dorrington. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, so on the East Coast. And of course, urbanization has been important here. I do EDI work with organizations, and I really lend to the emphasis of having inclusion in the discussions. Having recently worked with a not-for-profit, an organization actually that oversaw Africville, or Africvillians actually. They were displaced in the 60s due to urbanization, as a result of urbanization. And the city had made decisions without input or voices from the community. So I think that, to me, making sure that our cities are inclusive of those voices, the voices that live in the city, is going to be critical for the success of our cities and our economies across Canada. So I come with the fact that from Mi'kmaq, the territory of the Mi'kmaq people, that we sit here with peace and friendship treaties and understand that land is precious to all, but making sure that when we're building, we're hearing from all is going to be critical. I'm going to pass it over to Janea.
I think that would be me. That's Jamila. Thank you,
Jamila.
Cynthia. Hi, everyone. Thanks for hosting today. So I'm coming to this work in an interesting way. I'm an urban planner. I work as a private consultant with Urban Strategies, a wonderful firm in Toronto. And I'm also coming to this work as a person who really does a lot of volunteer work, trying to address issues of anti-Black racism in communities, particularly in Toronto, but in Canada broadly. I volunteer with a group called the Black Planners and Urbanists Association, a national nonprofit organization that really focuses on mentorship, advocacy, and addressing issues of anti-Black racism, but also drawing on the great strength and knowledge that Black people have in city building practices over the centuries. And I also do a bit of work with OPPI as a volunteer on their anti-Black racism task force, helping put together some recommendations on how to strengthen the profession and also get us to kind of think differently about what it means to be a planner. So Anika, that's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jamila. Hi, my name is Anika Mark. I am representing Black Urbanism TO today. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 2018, looking to re-envision Black neighborhoods to support our social, economic, and cultural advancement. Our co-founders, Dane Williams and Romaine Baker, went to Eglinton West, which is our, one of our first communities that we're focusing on. And we had all lived in the neighborhood, and them specifically had really strong cultural ties to the neighborhood. They went back looking to kind of capture what was once Little Jamaica, and realized that there was still so much culture, still so much vibrant economic potential. And so they decided, instead of doing a documentary, to revitalize and to be determined to revitalize and support business owners in advancing themselves and getting to a place where Little Jamaica is the cultural, prosperous place that it once was in our city, one of the first and largest Black neighborhoods in Canada. And now we're seeing those strands of culture, kind of fly away with, gentrification and development and things of that nature. So I'm really honored and happy to be here to represent Little Jamaica, first of all, to bring up our valued neighborhood in these types of conversations of displacement and gentrification, because it's live and it's happening right now. And I'm hoping that, being a part of these conversations, we can kind of put our foot in the door and be a part of the change that we want to see.
Thank you. Thank you, all of you. Just so the audience in general, we have a chat going on right now. If there are specific questions that you would like to hopefully get answered, plot them in there. We're going to go right until 1 o'clock. But Anika, I'm going to start with you on this question, and it opens up to everyone else afterwards. But How has COVID deepened the conversation on race and equity in urban planning?
That's such a great conversation. I think that COVID has exacerbated how stretched our communities are for resources. And has also really exposed how fast development's happening, how close it is that, it's not just Eglinton West and the LRT construction, it's not just Regent Park anymore. It's probably right up your neighborhood. Somebody is, creating a condo somewhere nearby, or something is being, remodernized or quote unquote revitalized is the term that gets used a lot. And so I think that COVID has really kind of and I think that something really interesting actually is the province expanded the times for construction orders. So if you were in a neighborhood that, let's say for instance, had an LRT construction project going through, you were probably subjected to 7 a.m. in a COVID-19 pandemic when we're in a lockdown. You're now being subjected to be in your home at 7 a.m. With construction noise right outside. And I used to work for Jill Andrew, Toronto St. Paul representative for NDP, MPP. And we had a lot of calls like that where, residents were like, there's construction happening, I'm working from home, what's going on? And so I think that COVID has really put the development conversation on the table for a lot more people than just, our Black and racialized communities, specifically, our more marginalized ones. I think it's now a Toronto-wide conversation. And I think there's good and bads to that. But I think that the way that we're handling it is, really focusing this conversation on Little Jamaican, trying to figure out how can we kind of alleviate the pressures of displacement.
Cynthia, can I ask, what's it like in your part of the Halifax and such?
Well, having an understanding that Blacks have lived here for well over 400 years in Nova Scotia, and we have 52 historic Black communities that date back to the 1700s. So those communities and having main streets or small towns or neighborhoods were critical for success. I think what COVID has brought forth is that the main society, the larger group, has no inroads to our communities. They don't understand our communities. They have no understanding of the needs because, again, when you're a marginalized community, you can speak, your voice may not be heard. So you have to have voices at the table. You have to have voices in the political offices in order to actually be heard. What we have found with COVID is that the resources were really stretched. I totally agree with that. And very thin. And then trying to build those resources. But what we did is we built those resources using people that look like us, making sure that we were going into our communities, we were helping our communities, and we were building the strength and character of people that look like us, but at the same time, making sure that the communities were building themselves up as well. So it's not about always going in and doing handoff. We were asking the community to start building. What are your needs? What do you need as we migrate going out of COVID? What do you need now? So we were actually allowing them to start having voices. And here in Nova Scotia, our government, both provincial as well as municipal governments, started to listen and understand, guess what, we need to actually hear from these people because they are part of our province as well as part of our cities. But most importantly, from a city perspective, they help with the economy, they help grow the city, and we have to understand what their needs are in order to help grow that city and economy.
Stephanie, the West Coast in Vancouver, how has COVID deepened that conversation for yourself?
Yeah, I find out here that the conversation deepens the way that it always has, and that is by impacted communities calling for accountability, calling for responsibility by governing authorities. We knew early days that Black communities, because of the ways that we live and the jobs we have, the socioeconomic realities of being marginalized, was going to impact our communities in disproportionate ways. However, in British Columbia, we didn't collect disaggregated data. We didn't have knowledge of how Black communities were being impacted. And so that conversation really had to be taken up by Black healthcare professionals, Black doctors, Black researchers, Black organizations, in order to really push the conversation. Now, there's been some responses and there's been some reactions, but we recognize, I think, like everyone's saying, that COVID exacerbated what the pre-existing conditions were. And then we didn't see the responses that we wanted to see for our community. So we had to take action ourselves. And that action is starting to push the policy conversation like it always does. We always are the ones that plant those seeds and water them. And so we continue to do that here out west. And in British Columbia, we did the very first, the Hogan's Alley Society did the very first publicly funded Black healthcare research that's ever been done in British Columbia's history. Now, that's just because we're rabble rousers and we push and we partnered, right, with really great Black people that work in this area. And now we have data that we can start to work with and expand and build on. But really, I think that all praises goes to the people you see on your screen and the people in your neighborhoods for actually having done this work.
Jamila, I just thank you, Stephanie. Jamila, I know we're coming back to Toronto, but what's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think that, everyone's kind of touched on the main point, which is really that, this idea of going back to this new normal or establishing or going back to the normal, right? When we leave the pandemic, what's life like post-COVID is actually kind of maybe what I can touch on a bit. And the point that Anika made and Stephanie and Cynthia, that, the situation before COVID wasn't really great for Black people in terms of access to housing, access to transit and cycling infrastructure in our communities, access to green spaces. So we've seen these studies that have been done that just identify there's a disparity in access to all these amenities. And what we kind of saw in the beginning of COVID was this movement to open streets and a movement towards finding housing for all, and cities coming up with innovative ways to try to address these broader social issues because we know they're related to public health issues. And unfortunately, we haven't seen a systemic change to implement these as ongoing efforts. So what I think we are looking for, what we've also seen is that a lot of young and existing Black planners, people of all ages, have been pushing for systemic change. We're looking for policy regulation change. We're looking to address zoning. We're looking to address official plans, planning acts. We think, it's wonderful to have all these symbolic things where people express their solidarity with Black people, but we want to see systemic change. We want to see how you can ensure that our communities are better served by the policy tools that we're using. And I think that groups, like all of our groups, are doing these kind of things. We're pushing for these systemic changes. And I really have to say, as Stephanie said, it is the grassroots efforts. It's the folks on the ground, like BLM and other organizations, who really spearheaded a lot of the conversation around the importance of addressing anti-Black racism outside of planning, but also related to planning. And I think that it's not only COVID. I think 2020 was a very pivotal point for the planning industry, and I think a lot of other sectors as well, in light of the death of George Floyd and the ongoing, anti-Black racism related to policing. So there's all these other broader social issues that we're dealing with. And when COVID ends, they will be there, and they will probably be worse off because of a lot of the challenges we all express. So how do we move forward for systemic change?
Fair enough. And I mean, you've touched on a bit of what you still want to see, what we still need to see. I'm wondering, Cynthia, is there a piece there that you're still looking to see government officials, the broader public hit on for what happens next?
I think here in Nova Scotia is a little bit different. The Decade of People of African Descent, the United Nations Decade, basically Nova Scotia is the only province that is signed on to affect change, not only provincially within employment, but how do they help with communities and grow communities and listen to communities. So making sure that we're more represented. Because of that striking off the pin on paper, we've seen changes within employment, which helps with the economic fabric of our communities for sure. We have also seen the opportunities from a justice perspective. We just prior to COVID happening, there was a release. It was just the month before, really, when we went into lockdown, the release of the street check report here in Halifax. And the discrepancy in dealing with marginalized people, Blacks, Indigenous, people of color, very evident. The police have been brought up to task, and as a result, the city and the policing system are looking at effective changes, but those changes aren't in isolation of having the voices at the table. So there has been a committee that's been struck, really assessing this and looking at the justice side of it, initially policing, but of course we know that there's this whole component of the court system that has to be addressed as well, and it's not going to stop there. So of course we do have systemic barriers to success, but how do we actually migrate and have those discussions? So because of some of the things that we have undertaken as a province, we're now seeing the cities and the towns starting to implement some of these components and really focused on making sure that they are more inclusive. It's not just a policy written on paper, it's actioning some of these policies now, and they're being more accountable to the people, their constituents. They're being more accountable to them, and we, the constituents, people of African ancestry for sure, are making them and holding them accountable because they are our public officials. But at the same time, this is our city, these are our towns, and we have to make sure that we have voices to ensure that the generations to come, people that look like us, that we don't start off, or we still don't have colonial vestiges that separate us and basically have marginalized us in the past. Let's not be marginalized now. We have a voice, and let's use that voice. And I think George Floyd and Black Lives Matters has actually brought to out in light the systemic barriers and systemic racism that has been entrenched or just under the cover of our beautiful country, but in particular, each of our provinces. And I think we have to now step up and make sure that we are accounted for. And what the province, the policy, the strategy, they actually denoted the strategy as count us in. So I think that we now have a voice, and we have to take advantage of that voice and use that voice and say, we want to be counted in, and we want our voices to be heard because we want to help build this province in this area of Canada.
Stephanie, Anika, I am going to ask you the same question about what you still would like to see, but Cynthia, I'm just going to probe a little bit, if you don't mind, if you could just talk briefly about the decade of African descent, if you can just give us a bit of context to what that is and why the rest maybe of Canada is not up to speed on that significant time frame.
What we ended up doing is when the United Nations declared the decade of people of African descent, what we in Nova Scotia did is we started looking at the inequities of Black people. We have, in Nova Scotia, Blacks have been here since the 1600s. So over 400 years of presence here in Nova Scotia. I root my ancestors back to 1783. So we have been here for a long time. And marginalization, discrimination, and racism has been a part of our society. So with that decade, a group of people got together and they said, where are our injustices? Where are the social, how do we build that social fabric? How do we become part of instead of marginalization or left out? So what are the conversations that we've been left out of? They have health. People on this, they build a committee. We have what we call the Decade of People of African Descent. There is an organization that has people that talk to health, people that talk to justice, people that talk to education, our higher ed institutions. We have representatives from government, municipal government. We have representatives from different communities. We have representation from businesses across our province, all sitting there talking about, okay, these are our barriers. How do we overcome them? Who do we have to target? Who do we have to talk to? Who do we have to address? What business case do we have to build? How do we be inclusive in the strategies going forward? So even around planning and urban planning, we actually have discussions because of this. Halifax, because of Africville, Halifax actually has an office that deals with folks from the African diaspora. So anytime there's a policy change, and or new policies going in for Halifax, any changes to roads, and there's consultation done with our marginalized communities. So they have started to build in because they realized what they did in the 60s was just wrong, and they had to apologize for it, and they had to actually have reparations to that group community as well. So again, it comes with the price tag, but it also comes with the fact that we are a people. We live here and we should be respected. Our voices should be heard. You should hear from us when you're making changes. It's most important. So this group actually has been working very diligently, making sure that they're involved in all aspects on how we collectively have a voice, how we have not only the voice, but actions integrated into, or strategies integrated into the next phase of what that may be. If that's the justice system, if that's urbanization, if that is dealing with the healthcare, if that is dealing with the education, we have a voice sitting at the table, making sure that we're not left out as we move forward in Nova Scotia.
Count us in, count us in. Anika, what would you still like to see? What are we missing after COVID?
Yeah, I think that what we're still missing is, I would say, authentic community consultation. I think that, we're definitely doing better at consultations and making it a point to target specific people for consultations, but beyond consultations, right? After we're done the talking, after the 2 hours of us convening and communities pouring out their hearts and their souls and telling you about their families and why businesses and moms and pops are important to them, what happens after, right? After the reports get released and disseminated to community, after everybody has, Twitter fingers all over the place, what happens to our communities and how do we actually implement and actionize what we're talking about? I think that's what's missing for me. And I see that a lot in our conversations that we have, with stakeholders, government officials in Little Jamaica. But I think that it's a conversation that needs to be had about the bureaucracy of the way that we do things, that needs to also change, that we need to be willing to step out of the box and willing to do what's right and what's necessary for people today, instead of thinking about how we used to do things and how things, how the traditional and conventional ways are important. No. They're not working. They haven't worked. They're not working for people right now. And I think especially when we go through a pandemic, an international health crisis, I think we get some grace on changing the ways that we do things, maybe so that we can actually start to include and make our spaces more inclusive in general. So, yeah.
We're allowed to be bold.
Seriously.
Right?
Happy Black History Month and you know what I'm saying? Just marginalized month in general. That's my vibe.
No, fair. Stephanie, again, what would you like to still see?
One of the things I think we haven't centered enough is accessibility for people with disabilities, and the ways that the pandemic has really pushed a lot of vulnerable people deeply isolated, alone. We think about elders that have been alone for a long time. I've got a mother with Alzheimer's. The home support has been cut by over 50%. She gets 8 hours a week of home support. It's just completely threadbare, the way that vulnerable people with disabilities are experiencing things. It was great when patios opened up. That was awesome. We really wanted to make sure restaurants stayed healthy, but if we weren't thinking about accessibility and keeping sidewalks clear and making sure that people and elders can move around despite that, disruption, which was a positive disruption, then I think we're exacerbating the same inequities we don't want to see in our cities. And the other thing I really think we've got to think about are the ways that poverty and homelessness are impacting Black and Indigenous people, particularly in this country. We made moves to get disaggregated data adopted in British Columbia when we do our point-in-time homeless count, which of course is flawed. But we had to take the case to the Federal Homeless Secretariat to make sure that they made that race question mandatory, because it's never been made mandatory in the point-in-time count. So what we don't measure, we don't fix. And we know that people of African descent are absolutely overrepresented in the homeless population. So we've got a ways to go with that. I think we need more housing, dignified housing, housing for people who are struggling in poverty, for elders, for youth aging out of care. I really want to lift up a colleague of mine that's on the phone today, on the line today, Donnie Rosa, who's the general manager of Parks here in Vancouver. Parks is one of the, and I hate to use this word, but the lowest levels of government in British Columbia. You've got provincial, you've got regional, you've got civic, and then you've got this is a unique structure here in Vancouver, where it's got its own elected council and governance. And of course, homelessness has become a urban issue now in Parks, where people are finding places to, have reprieve, to find community, to have interdependence, a modicum of safety instead of sleeping in doorways. And twice throughout this last 2 years, we've responded to over 300 person encampments, working very closely with the park board, BC Housing did. And we've taken approaches that absolutely centered the needs of people there, Indigenous people overrepresented. We use culturally appropriate services. We use trauma-informed practice. That has not caught on in this country. It needs to. Call us. We can tell you how we did it. Because enforcement traumatizes people. Forcing people out of encampments who have nowhere to go, who don't have housing, is not the way. And we've learned that lesson, and it's still not. You don't see that proliferating across this country when people are just desperately in need of housing and shouldn't be punished for that. So I think we've got a long way to go on those two areas, I would say, accessibility and homelessness, because those are really the least advantaged people in our communities and really have not always been centered in this pandemic.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Spending time here in the city over the summer last year and seeing how our police forces and our elected officials removed people out of our parks. Horrible situation. One of those key moments in living in a city where you're desperately trying to find ways, find projects, find pieces that our officials can look at as a beacon, as a way of doing it maybe better. Jamila, and that'll lead into my next question. Are there projects, are there cities, are there people who are doing it right, who are making you excited that they are thinking outside of that box and not looking to just just do what has already been done? Is there anyone exciting you in that way?
I think there are a lot of people, especially the folks on this call today, huge fans of everyone. And I think one point I just also want to say is that I think the reason we talk about these topics is not just from our professional perspectives or because this is the job we have. It's also for me very much tied to my own lived experiences and hearing these, amazing points that Stephanie's raising about encampments and knowing the folks that I've supported to get housing and the difference it makes when they're living in a park compared to when they're living in a house, and seeing the challenges that, my relatives face with policing and enforcement, the challenges I experienced through immigration. So I think while this conversation is also couched in this broader conversation, how to improve planning as a profession, as a field, or whatever it is, it's also about really just fundamentally also helping ourselves and our communities and our everydays, right? And all the hats that we wear. In terms of the folks that I'm really excited about, I really do have to plug my own group because I wouldn't be part of it if I wasn't excited about the work we're doing with the Black Planners and Urbanists Association, and particularly the folks that are making up that group. Abigail Maria has been doing phenomenal work bringing together a range of Black planners across the country. She's really been a mentor figure to me. She's just understands how to convene people. And I think that's really key for someone who's in this profession. I'm also very excited about the work that Keisha St. Louis McBurney's doing. She works at Urban Strategies with me. Young, talented planner, intellect. Her work really touches on these important points that I've still trying to wrap my head around. And how do you deal with redress and reparations and justice for communities? If we've identified the issues, then how do you move towards restorative justice through planning? Is it possible? I'm also very excited about the work that Eli does. Eli Bawa, he's now at the City of Toronto, and he does a lot of work around queer spaces, Black queer spaces. How do you think about the places that have been lost, and how do you make space for Black people, Black queer people to take back those spaces, but also for us to also broaden our understanding of what queer spaces are. So those are a few people that I'll just throw out.
No, that's fantastic. Anika, I'm going to go to you next. What do you feel, what projects or cities or people are exciting you right now?
Oh my gosh, I love this. This is one of my favorite questions. Really, because we're such a group inspired by community, that our energy is really fueled off of that, off of people around us and the work that they're doing. So I think the first person I really want to big up is Black Cultural Zone. I don't know if folks have heard of them. They're in Oakland, California, and we had come across them online when we were Romaine and Dane had come across them online, and they were basically doing exactly what we wanted to do in Little Jamaica, but on this large scale level in California. And I bring that up, obviously not to shift the focus from Canada, but just to kind of bring up that these conversations are happening everywhere, and to take an international approach is to be successful with kind of pushing this message forward. And so Black Cultural Zone, they do a lot of really incredible work at organizing communities, creating subcommittees to get things done in terms of architectural design, in terms of advocacy, in terms of policy development. And they've really been able to galvanize their entire community to really push forward incredible conversations on development for Black communities and Black residents and Black businesses in California. So I want to big them up because that work really inspired us and we really took a lot of notes. We got to meet with Carolyn Johnson, who is one of the major organizers. We've got to meet with her a couple of times and she's absolutely incredible. And so I really wanted to bring them up because they were a major inspiration for us. And then I wanted to bring it to a local level and say Friends of Chinatown, some really incredible organizers who are doing, again, same work as us, but in our Chinatown, that is, again, being displaced because of development, because of developer greed. I'm going to just say that. I think that, especially when you look at like an international, like Chinatowns are international. And the fact that we're about to lose ours in Toronto over development, and our city not being able to safeguard culture in that way, I just want to big up the people in Friends of Chinatown because they're really taking on a major task with that. And they get our support 100%. We've had them at a couple of our events and they're just incredible organizers over there. And then I just want to say really quickly, Reclaim, Rebuild Eglinton, Egg West, doing really incredible and really revitalizing energy in Little Jamaica, youthful energy. And we just love the work that they do as well. So those are really three incredible organizations and just, people that are doing the work that we know is necessary for not just like us in Little Jamaica, but just, across the city and across the world.
Anika, I know you're not going to be able to put this all into like a 30-second soundbite for me, but can you give some context to what Little Jamaica is? Why are we fighting so damn hard to keep that piece of, what is this, 3-4 blocks? Like, why are we fighting so intensely to keep that going?
We're fighting so intensely because it's not gone, I would say. I think that's like really critical is that when you go to Little Jamaica, it's still there, like we just lost Randy's recently. That means that throughout that 10 years of long constructions, our business owners have been doing every single thing right. They've been resilient, they've been tough, they've been soldiering through the Metrolinx construction and also just inactivity to their concerns and their issues with the construction. They've been tough and they've been there for us because they know how important our culture is to us. And I would say also that it is the staple, it is the heart of Toronto and Canada's culture. And so it's not that easy to just kind of let that go and just leave that to the wayside. It is a part of you. And that's what people really realize when they see Little Jamaica go away is, wait a second, that was me. Something about my life is a part of that community. Let's take a step back and think about, do I want this to be gone? Do I want this to not be able to pass this on to my children? These are conversations that we have to have about culture in our city, which I just think is for one of the most multicultural places in the world, I wonder, I truly wonder. But yes, 30 seconds. Oh,
no, that's all good. Cynthia, what's exciting you? What are you looking at that is piquing your interest?
I think I'm going to sort of stay close to home. I think there's a lot of activities going across and being done in cities across Canada. And I think each city has to actually focus on their city in order to grow, in order to change. It has to be a clear focus. I think we can come together if there's that intersectionality. But here in Nova Scotia, I would say right now, I talked about DPAD, which is the Decade of Persons of African Descent. And because they're so broad in what they're looking at, I think that is incredible. It really helps have more broader conversations and not just micro conversations. I think HAC, which is Health Association of African Canadians here in Nova Scotia, that's an association that has doctors and nurses, and we're talking about healthcare and advocating to make sure that as we're changing our healthcare system here in Nova Scotia, that we have a voice. What has been missing in the healthcare for people of color, Blacks, Indigenous, let's make sure that that change is incorporated when we start to rebuild what our healthcare authority looks like, Nova Scotia Health Authority looks like. And then, of course, I would say the Nova Scotia Association of Black Social Workers. This is an association made up of Black social workers that are across our province. They are integral and have been integral in regards to COVID and helping with reaching those communities, getting information out to those communities, making sure those communities were connected by actually getting a grant to make sure that they got tablets and stuff like that. So our seniors in particular had access so that they know what was happening, that they weren't isolated. So removing that isolation, which helps eliminate some of the mental health issues. I think all of these folks really are astounding here in Nova Scotia because those organizations are focused on making sure that we better where we're at today. And they're also at the same time advocating for, because all of these organizations have to do aspects of advocating, and they're advocating with not only the provincial government, but the municipal governments to make sure that the voices are there. Just yesterday here in Nova Scotia, our provincial government gave over $1 million in a grant to a church that has been expanding here. It is really what we classify as the mother church. It's the first church within the African United Baptist Association, which is in downtown Halifax, which is an area where Blacks live. And they gave them that because they are doing work in programs that really are grassroots programs, making sure that there's food security for kids going to school. So school programs, making sure they are fed, making sure that parents who need help with and any aspects in that, they have various programs that are really working with that community to make sure that they're helping the community to thrive. They have to, first of all, learn, because there are some things that they're missing, but they're making sure that they're building that so that we're actually having that conversation and they're able to partake in the conversation and not let somebody else have their voice. The one thing that we've been doing is we have to incorporate youth, because we're not going to be here forever. We need to make sure the youth are following behind. We need to make sure that they have a voice. We need to make sure that the history, the information that is being shared is shared, because here in Nova Scotia, we classify ourselves as Blacks, but there are two distinct groups. There are Blacks that have been here for hundreds of years, like myself and my ancestors. So we classify ourselves as African Nova Scotian because we see ourselves as Indigenous to Nova Scotia, since we've been here since the beginning and the founding of Nova Scotia by settlers. We arrived on the first ship that came here. But at the same time, we have African Canadians, the newcomers, the ones that have migrated here since the 1900 onward. We listen, at the end of the day, the injustices that were had were different for each group of people. And I think that we have to have some of those discussions, because some of that talks to the broken trust, the broken promises. Because we here in Nova Scotia, after the American Revolution, when Black loyalists arrived here, we're all promised land. the Blacks did not get the land, and there are people here in Nova Scotia who have been paying taxes but still do not own their land. It has not been given over from the Crown to them when the Crown gave over land to the white loyalists that arrived here on the same ships in 1783. So there are lots of things that have to happen, but I think Michelle Sean is in her foundation. She's having and hosting with DPAD a youth conference this summer to really start to get them involved in what they need to be involved in. Is that politics? Is that healthcare? Is that social justice? So that they start to have an enlightening at a young age as to what's going on and how they can be a part of what the strategy is going to look like in the outcome as we move forward in the future.
Thank you, Cynthia. Stephanie, I mean, we're hearing a lot. You've touched on a few pieces. Is there anything else that really excites you? Any other cities or projects that we need to know about?
Yeah, I better stay excited or I'm gonna just have to lay in my bed all day. It's true, you know, we need to stay excited about things. One of the things I'm really excited about in the housing realm, of course, for me, is this table that was set up and established by the City of Vancouver that BC Housing is now co-hosting for transgender diverse, two-spirit housing roundtable, so that we can actually start to talk about the needs of people who are transgender diverse two-spirit in housing. It's a first. It's run by and hosted by racialized, transgender, gender diverse, two-spirit folks. And it is a really important conversation set for our sector to talk about the needs of people who have been excluded, pushed to the margins, and are at increasing, at risk in a lot of settings in our cities and struggle with poverty. So that's a work that is illuminating for us, BC Housing as an institution, and has real impacts, I think, in long-term implications for our sector in a positive way. I'm really interested in systems change, because I think without getting to roots, the branches and the fruit will continue to be problematic. And so community land trusts, are something that has excited me for now several years. I had the good fortune to go to the CLT conference that's held in America. It is a lot of Black folks at this conference, one of the most lit conferences I've ever been to. There is a great time happening at this conference. They had a street party. They closed the streets. They had a DJ. I mean, what's interesting about land trusts is that they were born out of the civil rights movement. They were specifically to help Black farmers and Black people find place and hold place, because the conversations you're hearing today are all about displacement. The system is designed to, first of all, push us into poverty, and then we're relegated to parts of our urban areas that are for poor people, that are low income. Then these sites become targets for redevelopment to unlock the value of the land. This is what happened in Nova Scotia. This is what happened in Little Burgundy. This is what is happening in Toronto, Haringey and Ottawa. This is what's happening and has happened in Vancouver under urban renewal and the displacement of Hogan's Alley. So if we don't tinker with this system and get to this roots, we're going to have this conversation in 20 years. Our grandchildren are going to be having this conversation in 50 years. So it's critical that we address these roots. And to me, community land trusts, they remove the land from speculation. It's no private ownership anymore. It's held in a not-for-profit model. The members have similar kinds of governance models like you do in a co-op housing model. So there's more participation, there's more security of tenure, and then you prevent the gentrification pressures that come with new development, because the minute that we put up a new building, the values go up everywhere else, and that's where the targets start to hit our small Black businesses and people struggling to stay in place. So land trusts, for me, shift the needle. It's what we've proposed here in Vancouver. 4 years ago, I laugh a little bit because it's absurd. 4 years ago, a policy was adopted by the City of Vancouver committing to the land trust proposal we made 4 years later, we don't have our memorandum of understanding signed yet. We have a commitment to do it. We've had several. Hopefully this is the time, because Black folks, we're patient and we work with you. So we're going to continue to do that. But our land trust proposal will take the entire city block that was really the kind of the high street of Hogan's Alley in the Black neighborhood, and put that entire thing into a community land trust for preservation, for the 99-year lease that we're going to sign, and hopefully in perpetuity, with affordable homes, small business space, nonprofit space, social enterprise space, childcare, and a cultural center at the heart of it. It's inclusive housing, but it's really meant to center Black people in city building, which we have not been. We have been relegated, and all that incredible human potential. You're hearing great ideas here, but imagine the thousands and thousands of Black people that have great ideas to contribute to making our cities better and have no chance to do that. So these are the things that, I'm really excited about. And these are the ways I think we start to shift the needle on things like intergenerational homelessness and poverty, intergenerational exclusion from, business making and commerce in our city. So, you can tell I'm excited.
We've got 9 minutes left, and I'm seeing there's so many questions in the chat. I'm not going to get to them, but please keep piling them in, because we'll have a transcript of all of this that people will be able to touch on. I'm going to throw this in, and it's not a question that I've asked any of you before, and it is a bit personal on the fact that I've got a 10-year-old and 13-year-old downstairs, and they're doing their darndest to keep as quiet as possible during this event. How do I get them engaged and wanting to be a part of this conversation? How do I make sure that they understand that their voices actually matter in this entire enchilades? I know I haven't thrown this to you ladies beforehand, but I really wanted to not put you on the spot, but just get your honest feedback on how we get young people to be as passionate, as wanting to see the change that we all know needs to happen, but I don't know if they know.
I'll jump in. I think play is an important aspect of building cities. And as a kid, I used to be able to get outside and be in spaces that were safe for me to play in, that were, had the kinds of amenities. There was access to tennis courts, basketball courts, swimming pools, like things that were accessible. I grew up in Hamilton, and at a time when there was probably more investment in public infrastructure. And we can see that eroding in the urban growth machine. So I think for kids, they've got the imaginations. They know the kinds of spaces they need to play, to be healthy, to engage with each other. As adults, we want that, eye on the street. We want to make sure that the old porch and kind of, ways that we could observe kids. Sometimes, the aunties would give you a knock if you were out of line. Like, those things matter when you think about, the ways that kids need that kind of structure, that kind of care, that love that comes with discipline as well. But, having spaces that kids can think about and grow their imagination and see themselves in, especially when it comes to play and learning, is so critical, I think, when we consider how we're building cities, because there are some neighborhoods that have nowhere to play, nowhere safe to play, nowhere green, nowhere with outdoor activities or amenities, and they're being eroded as we develop cities. So that would be one. I think play is the hook. At least it was for me.
Jamila, thank you. Jamila, go.
Yeah, play. Sorry, go ahead. Did you want to go, Cynthia?
Yeah, thank you very much. If I may, it's also around discussion. You as the parent have to have the discussions on what potentially they can do. So there's some education, some discussion, and when I say education, historical education, that's true, and they're not hearing from somebody else what's going on. It's fact from you, but what you've been able to do at their age, and what you see happening, and how they can contribute. So it's almost that engagement as well. So that education, engagement, that discussion, and then helping them to, as you noted, Stephanie, play. learn to think about how they can take that and move to the next level. But I think it's the engagement that's going to be critical. And they're not just a child, they're only a child for a short period of time. They're going to be an adult for a heck of a lot longer period of time. So how do we make sure that when they're coming into adulthood, they're more realistic and also they're a dreamer with a realism around it, because you have to build the dream, and that starts with we as parents helping them to dream, to play, to think big, because guess what? That's how inventions start.
Fair enough. Thank you, Cynthia. Jamila?
So I have a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and I don't know how they've been staying quiet. But you know, it's a difficult thing, and I think it's right what Cynthia's saying, and Stephanie as well. It's finding that balance between frank and honest truth telling, and then also letting them dream and imagine new worlds and possibilities. One of the things I do with my kids is we live downtown Toronto, so you see a mix of everything: the super expensive condos, and then the encampments as well. So when we're on our routes and we're going places, they'll ask me questions, and I try my best to answer, and I let them know, you know, as in child-friendly language, like, you know, the reality of the world we live in. And if they face challenges, we try to deal with it head on. My mom was very, very, very frank with us about things. And I guess she just had to, in terms of her own thinking of survival and toughening us up. And so I buy a lot of books for them. There's a lot of great resources. But it's also just coming from you. And building them up, really just building up their spirit, letting them know it's possible, that they're valuable, that they contribute to this world, they can make a difference, and that there might be barriers, but there are potentials to get over it, because we all wouldn't be here if it wasn't for people before us who did this amazing stuff to get us here, right? It's amazing. Cynthia's talking about this history of Black presence in Canada, and we're here with all these diverse representations of Blackness in these different spaces. So there's lessons to also learn from history.
Fair enough. Anika, you're last.
Oh, love it.
Give it to me.
I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to send a link in the chat. This was a workshop that I got to cultivate with an urban planning firm, CP Planning, a Black urban planning firm in Toronto. We got to do a program called Black Futures on Eglinton, where we actually went out into community and sought out the insights of young people for these development conversations, for these larger reports that we're writing about Little Jamaica. So we went to the Toronto Public Library, and we talked to folks in the Youth Hub, and we asked them to write stories and to kind of get into, we did an Afrofuturistic writing. It was a creative writing workshop, but to write what they wanted to see, or how they felt they saw themselves in 10 years on Eglinton. What did they want to see in their community in the next 10 years? And making sure that we gave them the agency to let us know that, you know, first of all, that we're not the end all be all of the neighborhood, right? Like, there are younger people than us that deserve to have their insights reported on, and to be sought out specifically. So giving those young people the agency to build their own communities and to dream their own dreams for our communities. And just, if you're an organizer, incorporating those young people, because they do want to have those conversations. And yeah, it might be, you know, a couple of mix and mingle conversations, but our young people want to have a voice. They have a voice. If you look at TikTok, even our young people are talking. So it's all about listening and making sure that they're incorporated in these conversations too.
Fair enough. We're literally at time. I need to just send a huge thank you to our panelists, Cynthia and Stephanie, Anika, Jamila. Thank you so very much for your time this morning and afternoon. To CUI, thank you for this space. This is a conversation that needs to continue. We are beyond Black History Month. This is a good thing that this is happening in March. I want it to happen in June. I want it to happen in November. We want it to continue throughout the year. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. This conversation just needs to continue. So let's continue it. Again, to the panelists, thank you so very much. This was awesome. And now my kids want to play. Have yourselves a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hosting, Lanrick.
Thank you so much, guys.
Bye all.
Bye, everyone.